Just generally speaking, people tend to eat a lot of starch and protein, whether that starch comes from complex carbohydrates or candies and white bread and that type of thing. But carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are kind of the balance of what we're looking for in building our plates.
Welcome to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. My name is Melissa Slemp, a certified nutritional health coach and the founder and CEO of Abundant Health with Melissa, where I help women with type 1 diabetes to feel more empowered and live their best life despite their diagnosis. Each week, I will bring conversations and strategies from guest experts and my experience living with type 1 for over 40 years now. So if you're a woman ready to redefine how diabetes can look and feel for you, then the Type 1 and Midlife podcast is the show for you. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode. I am so excited to announce and to introduce Kitty Finklea. She is a registered dietitian and will be a regular guest and contributor here to help us better understand food and how to create an eating plan that can fit a woman's busy lifestyle, navigating type 1 diabetes and throughout hormonal changes. That is also sustainable. So that is something that we both think is important. And myself, living with type 1, we're here to share stories and facts and to bring to you just the clear truth about really some things that you can be looking at and considering with your own diet and eating plan. And our hope is to help you crowd out all the noise with all the information out there. We know it's hard to know what and how to eat to feel your best and to reach your blood sugar goals. So we want these episodes with Kitty to equip our listeners like you to make sound choices based on unbiased nutritional facts. So we invite you to visit our site, type1andmidlife.com, and leave feedback, your questions, and share topic ideas that Kitty and I can bring for you and other listeners. So today we're going to introduce Kitty, and you get a chance to learn her and more about her. And we talk about the balanced plate and just some simple kind of foundational theories around food and nutrition. And to get started, after you listen, you can download a free guide which is for blood sugar and hormone balancing meals and strategies and 7 days of delicious recipes. So I invite you to do that. And the link to grab this is in the show notes. So listen in to meet Kitty, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Just a reminder that nothing you hear on this Type 1 and Midlife podcast should be a substitute for professional medical advice. Please always consult your medical professional before changing your diet, insulin dosages, or healthcare plan. Well, hello and welcome. I am here today with Kitty Finklea, and she is somebody that I am so happy to have been introduced to. We have a mutual friend, and she is going to be a big part of this podcast going forward. And today is her introductory episode. Today, we're just going to kind of go over the basics and kind of give some tips on how we as women with type 1, as we approach midlife, or maybe we're already in midlife, can better serve our plate and how we feel in managing blood sugar. So welcome, Kitty. We're happy that you're part of what we're doing.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. And this is going to be an ongoing, I'll call it a series, but Kitty will be here throughout the year, regular episodes. And one of the things I do want to mention at the front end, and I'll remind our listeners at the end too, is that we want to hear what nutrition and lifestyle even topics that you want to hear more about. So that is something that both her and I together can come in here and provide for you. So I will provide the link to the website for you to reach out and to give us your show ideas, your topic ideas. So what we want to do, living with type 1 myself, what we eat not only fuels our bodies, and how we feel and function. And all this will support. And what we're hoping to do with this series with Kitty is to help empower those of us with those choices we have to make with food every day, right? And realizing what and how you eat is unique to you and your lifestyle. We don't advocate any sort of diets or diet plans or anything like that. We are coming in here speaking the truth from what I've experienced, not only living with type 1 myself, but Kitty as a registered dietitian who serves and helps people of all demographics. So she definitely can help and support us with these stages. We've been familiar with what that plate has been. I grew up kind of knowing it. And then when I was diagnosed, I got more familiar with it. But I will be honest, I knew nothing about food back in the day. And I'm going to share more about that story in a bit. But Kitty, explain to us, as far as like through your training and working with people, what does a balanced plate mean?
So a balanced plate just means having carbohydrate, protein, and fat at each meal. Typical Americans, the American diet, they call it the SAD diet.
Right.
Typically, we eat Americans, I'm not calling out type 1, people with type 1, but just generally speaking, people tend to eat a lot of starch and protein, whether that starch comes from complex carbohydrates or candies and white bread and that type of thing. But carbohydrates, proteins, and fats are kind of the balance of what we're looking for in building our plates.
Yes. And I'm going to share this in a second too, but you realize this because even if you're working with people with diabetes or not, your goal is still for everybody to feel and function best. And blood sugar balance is vital for all of us.
Correct.
Right. And balanced plate does do this for us. And I'm going to share a story because I didn't even know this. Again, I was diagnosed at 14. I was pregnant with my daughter. I was 28, 29 when I was pregnant with Sarah. She's now 27. Oh my goodness, they grow up so fast. And I was considered high risk. And, I had a great doctor, had all the great, I had a lot of support within, my OBGYN team. Went to a dietitian. Believe it or not, for the first time, I went to a dietitian. That was something they recommended. And this was, let's see, what year was this? 1995. And I learned so much. I remember coming out I still remember sitting and talking with her and how impactful it was, how important balanced was. Because again, I didn't even know what that looked like. And prior to that, my blood sugar was never really in good control in the earlier years. So, and obviously when you're pregnant with type 1, you need to be in control of the blood sugar at the best we can, to eliminate complications. So I had a big motivator, but I was thrilled to learn this and to immediately bring it into my eating plan and how I was doing it. And you know what? I keep doing that. And it's what I coach and it's what I try to tell everybody, again, whether we live with diabetes or not, it benefits every single one of us.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think what I've found with type 1s I've worked with is pregnancy is a huge motivator.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. Yeah.
And I think that starts a journey for many people that maybe didn't control their blood sugars before.
It sure is. Yeah. And it's I guess it's fortunate that the light has to go on at that point, but at least it does. At least it did for me. And, some other things that, and I'm sure that you can speak into this as well, is not only blood sugar, how it affects how we feel, energy, our mood. We want our blood sugar to be more on, and nobody's perfect, even those walking around with working pancreases, their blood sugar is still going up after they eat. That is normal. That is not unexpected. We are lucky to wear CGMs on many of us, so continuous glucose monitors, so we can get that constant, instant feedback. So that's very helpful.
It's been a game changer. It's been a game changer for so many people.
Yes. And And we're seeing this in just the health space, wellness space, that wearing the CGMs it's very popular. People also of all areas of life, again, with or without diabetes, want to know more about how their food is affecting them and the metabolic health, right?
Right.
So let's start at the top. So you mentioned carbs, because that is interesting, because that does tend to be what we kind of build our meals around. So can you explain the difference between the different carbohydrates and how it affects our blood sugar response to blood sugar?
Carbohydrates typically come from plants.
Mm-hmm.
Plants are probably, generally speaking, the best carbohydrates. When we start breaking down plants into smaller levels, like blood sugar levels, when we talk about simple carbohydrates versus complex carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, which would be like sugar, juice, jellies, those turn into blood sugar. I always call that direct deposit. It just kind of automatically, which is great if your blood sugar's low.
Exactly. That's the fix for a low.
It's
but
great.
That's something we want to sustain ourselves with, for sure. Yeah.
Right. And then as we go into, I'm kind of going backwards here. I'm going from simple to complex. But if we build that into cakes, cookies, and pies that have some fat added to it, it's maybe a little bit less quick into blood sugar. Then as we get into the plant kingdom, like apples, berries, that type of thing, beans that have protein, carb, and fat in them, they start to become more balanced. Then we know veggies have very low carb. Your non-starchy veggies have very low carb, don't tend to affect blood sugar too much. Unless you eat a whole bag of carrots, you might see.
Right. Exactly. Yes.
So I typically, another thing that's important in this whole conversation is the gut microbiome, and everything starts in the gut. And we're seeing more and more research on how the gut affects our mood. And that is also very positively affected by eating a variety of plant foods.
Yeah. And for us to do that and to introduce them, it's probably better. When we talk about vegetables, this is another funny story, because I grew up not eating very many vegetables. It's just a different era. It tended to be canned vegetables, and that's just what we had. That's what we knew. So I guess I had an aversion to them based on that for many years. It's so funny, because never lose hope, because, oh my gosh, that is my favorite thing to eat now. It's all the different vegetables. But wouldn't you say it's better for us if we're introducing more plant-rich, complex carbs, to do it maybe a little slower?
Yes.
Just based on that effect on the microbiome.
Right. And to, if people increase their fiber from plants too fast, they can have a lot of GI distress.
Yeah.
So, it's like, think about how many plants you're eating per week now. And when I say plants, that's fruits, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, herbs and spices even come into that play.
It comes from the ground. Yes.
And then, starchy vegetables versus non-starchy vegetables, all of that comes into play. And it's just a matter of thinking what you want to try, what you like, and then slowly adding those in.
Exactly. Yes. So variety is really good. I love a beautiful, colorful plate. So sometimes that's the easiest way to kind of gauge it. I'm often asked too, it's like, okay, so how do you put all this together? It's like, well, open the fridge, or, look at your counter and seeing what's available, what you've got in stock, and just go for it. Start chopping and adding, and, just seeing, how many different colors we can get on a plate, because that's just naturally going to give us more variety, not to mention the taste.
Yes.
And the different vitamins and minerals and trace minerals and all of that. So all those things that our body needs. Yes. So let's jump to protein. Again, we're just going to do a highlight on these macronutrients. So there's 4 macronutrients. So there's the carbs, the fiber, protein, and then fats, right? And I think a lot of people forget about the fiber, because that's just what you were talking about with the complex, because that is where the fiber, it not only makes a difference in our blood sugar because it turns into something that's going to be more slowly absorbed and digested.
And that's the part that's not digested. So it also helps. I don't know, people call it the broom of the digestive tract. It looks like sweeps things
I love
through.
that. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very, very important for the smaller intestine and the large intestine to have that fiber. But as far as protein goes, there's animal protein, which is like our meats, poultry, seafood, cheese, eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then there's protein that's in things like milk has carbohydrate and protein in it. Mm-hmm. Beans have carbohydrate and protein in it. And in the plant kingdom, we're looking more at the tofus, the tempehs, the nut butters, those type of things that also give us protein, but may give a little carb as well. But it's more balanced. So it's a slower absorption. Right. You still have to count the total carbohydrate, but it's definitely a slower absorption.
Yes, yes. And, you know, a good example of this, and this is something that that I definitely enjoy, is mixed nuts. So, and this is something that we'll dive into, because again, there's so many topics that we're talking about today that we're really going to kind of pull the layers back and really dive in deeper in future episodes. But nuts is a good example. And I know you're going to agree with this too, that quality food and how we source our food. So there's definitely a lot of things on the market, packaged things that can appear to be healthy. And nuts is a good example of that. You know, I think of all the different, choices on the shelf. And we look at the package and we say, oh, nuts, we think that's a good selection. But you and I both know if you look at those ingredients and you look at what they're adding to it, the whole natural raw nuts is our best choice, because again, it's real and pure and it's in its original natural state. It's not altered.
Right. And I think label reading's a whole nother
topic. It sure is.
But yes. Yeah. And I'm just going to throw this out there too. I'm really a big proponent of the blue zone eating, which is mostly plant-based, but you can do whatever you want to with it. I eat animal protein, but just looking at foods where they come from in nature is really an important part of this whole process.
It sure is. And if we can grow them at home, that's even better. Do you have a garden yourself?
I have a few things in the garden. I've been traveling more this year, so I haven't been planting as much, but I always have herbs growing. Mm-hmm. We have tomatoes and peppers growing right now, but we don't have a big garden.
Yeah, same here. We try to, depending on the season, and I've got the same thing. I've got some peppers and tomatoes that are doing pretty good so far. It's so exciting to watch, right?
Yes.
Just to see that process. Okay. So healthy fats. And I started with this saying healthy fats because there's a difference. There's different types of fats. So if you could just give us a kind of a overview of the different types and how we can tell.
Well, I grew up in the South, so that means I grew up with bacon drippings and fatback, which is not a healthy fat. So generally, animal fats are more artery clogging, also increase insulin resistance. So do you want to stay away from like a lot of butter? And again, that depends on if the cow got to graze on grass or if the cow is sitting in a industrial facility and being fed low quality grains. So fatback, bacon drippings, butter, those tend to be not as healthy. Coconut oil is one that was very, very popular early on. And in its raw form, it is healthier in small amounts, but here in the States, it's more processed. So raises the LDL, which is the lousy, lethal, bad cholesterol, increases more clogging of the arteries, generally speaking. But we don't need a lot of fat. And then the fat that we have in processed foods that are fried, like potato chips, one of my favorite things.
Right. Yeah, same here.
And then our healthier fats would be like nuts, olive oil, sesame oil, avocado oil. olives, those
Mhm.
types of things. So we need a blend of all of them.
That's a good example. Yes. And you just listed most of what's in my kitchen. And avocados. I think you mentioned that as well.
Yes.
And it's
Okay.
just, and again, it's about bringing in, this what we're sharing today is not to overwhelm or to make you feel like you've got to, get all this together in one sitting here, just listening to us. We're giving you kind of an overview of the different macronutrients and examples of how, different choices, the better choices to choose from, and to consider it and, to make these choices. And to definitely talk with your doctor about this too. So if you're working with a dietitian or somebody right now that maybe is working directly with you on what you are putting on your plate, definitely consult them too. So we talked about fats that, so it's the saturated and it's the trans fats. Those are the ones that, is this true that, so an unhealthy fat turns to solid at room temperature?
Generally speaking,
Generally
yes.
speaking.
Generally
Okay.
speaking.
Yeah. And it does depend on the temperature.
True.
It depends on how hot it is in your kitchen. But yeah, generally speaking. So that's another gauge too. Okay. So what about, and you talked about earlier, you were mentioning desserts. And this is actually one of my favorite topics. I grew up before I was diagnosed, I used to bake a lot. I loved cooking and I loved to bake. And I kind of steered away from that later on, not really understanding how to do it without jeopardizing my blood sugar. And I've since, this is something that a lot of listeners can find out, they can connect with me and find out some of the recipes that I've created in some free downloads, or not actually, some of them this is what I've done with recipes. I have found let's say chocolate chip cookies, let's say banana bread, right? These are things we grew up with, all right? These are favorites. And what I've done with these is over the years, I've just learned, obviously, it's that swap. So finding a better flour, finding a cleaner sugar. Believe it or not, we can still add sugar to some of these recipes. It really is about putting in, again, here's that balance again. We can add protein and healthy fats into cake recipes.
Right.
You mentioned that as well. There's definite ways to do this, and it's not as hard as we think. So it's just being conscious of the ingredients. And a lot of the recipes I share too include the macronutrients, which is golden, when we're not quite sure how this is how we can calculate, just to see the total grams. But most importantly, they do contain protein and fat. So, and they still taste amazing. Mm-hmm. And so there's ways to do this, and whether it's something you do every day, whether or not it's a dessert that you can kind of bring in on a daily basis, that's completely up to, it's very individual, very unique to everybody's needs and what they can factor in every day. But it's very doable, isn't it?
Definitely. And it's something, like, I think people trend with things like that. Like, they may want it every day, but it's also something like if there's a holiday,
Mm-hmm.
if they're having family gatherings, things like that also affect what we eat, not just our day-to-day routines. So I think just being aware of that and figuring out how you want to work that in.
Yeah. And, absolutely, because we don't, I can remember feeling left out with certain, like you were saying, occasions where, you go to something, or maybe you're bringing a dessert for an occasion, and I'm always the one bringing the healthier option. It's amazing because it tends to be the most popular one because everybody's interested in what Melissa brought. And oh my gosh, something that looks good and can taste good and not hurt their blood sugar either. So it's fun to be able to share that and to not feel like you're the odd person in the room when it comes to, to different circumstances or occasions or whatnot.
Or somebody questioning you, should you be eating that? That's the other thing, that it's like, we can all eat this.
Mm-hmm.
All of us.
Yeah. And, that kind of, that's a perfect point, because that kind of comes back to really why we're doing this series. I think one of the number one things I hear from, not only myself, because this was me many years ago. I didn't know anything about food. I went on and studied nutrition and learned that, and then I practice it. Because again, I've got the CGM giving me the feedback, so it's a constant learning experience for me. But I think that's the number one thing I hear from other women is they just don't understand food, even different types of carbohydrates. They don't really know what a balanced plate should look like. Portion control or portion size is another big topic, which I totally understand. And again, that's a very unique per person based on, their calorie needs, their lifestyle, their how much energy they're expending, all those factors, again, that determine that. But yeah, just understanding food. I think that's
Exactly.
the biggest thing. And there's so much information out there. It's information overload.
And I think too, that's a big point for me, is like people have to find what works for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that changes. And I think we're looking for silver bullet answers, and it's just what works best for your body.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then, our listeners are midlife. So 40 plus is kind of our age group that we're really trying to pour the information out to here. And things change with our hormones. That's another thing that we really want to be able to bring here, and that Kitty can help us with, is how we're balancing some different types of foods that we can bring in that are going to be more hormone balancing. And believe it or not, there are. And cruciferous is one of the first things I think of. That's one of the ones I've learned. And again, there's a lot of resources out there that can tell us these things. But the best thing to do is to come in here, hear some facts, talk with your doctor or somebody that you're working with, or your coach. Because I know there's some of my clients are listening to this too, so they understand this conversation as well. It's very unique. It has to be applied to them. And then you think about food likes and dislikes. So that's another whole part of it, right?
And it's not just the taste, it's also texture.
Texture. Yeah.
It's a huge thing for a lot of people.
It sure is. I used to not like squishy foods, and I'll call them squishy, things like mushrooms. And I was never one for Jell-O growing up, because again, it was just squishy in my mouth. I tend to like things more crunchy, firm. Isn't that funny how we're all a little bit different like that? But in that sense, you can still find ways, say, to bring mushrooms into, say, your salad, your sautés, and things like that. So including those amazing, vitamins and, the health benefits that mushrooms can provide, without it being, the texture being as evident.
Right. Chop it finer.
Right. There's ways around it for sure.
And I think too, even just trying new foods, like for people that are picky and have texture issues, it's just being open to trying, because sometimes it takes 10 to 20 times before you like it or even can tolerate it.
That is so true. That is so true. So what about, I'm going to steer away from macronutrients for a minute, and we'll just do a little bit of a highlight on this. But as far as drinks, certain things that we can drink, and then we can talk about alcohol in a very, very, again, a real summarized topic on that. But just generally speaking, what are good options?
Well, I'm a tea person. So I have a whole wall of tea in my kitchen. And I feel like that is one way you can change up flavors dramatically is with teas. There's fruity teas, there's minty teas. You can have them hot or cold.
So
you can
true.
put whatever sweetener you want in there that you're using. So to me, teas are one of the best things as far as giving flavor. And that's something I use a lot. And I just love plain old water, but I'll put lemon. I have a diffuser that I'll put fruit in. I had one lady that told me she got her cholesterol down by putting okra in her diffuser and drank okra water. So, I mean, the sky's the limit as to what you can put into your water.
See it and what happens, right? Try it and see what happens.
Kinds of herbs. Just,
yeah.
There's so many flavors out there that I think we don't tap into.
Yeah.
As far as like, juice is something for low blood sugar more than anything. And I am not a big proponent of a ton of non-nutritive sweeteners.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did a couple years ago buy the stevia plant when it was in the Home Depot and dried it and put that in my teas. And that was really good.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it depends on what you like. So some people really want their diet soda. And I'm one about dosage to your gut with those. If you got to have one a day and there's a certain time of day you need it, then go for it. It's just a matter of not going into that. I need a lot of diet drinks every day,
Yeah. And I think that goes back to just understanding what Diet Coke is and what it's made from and how it is affecting you. It's funny you brought up Diet Coke because I was addicted to it back in the day.
I think a lot of people are still addicted to it. It's a tough one.
It is. And it was, and you can step away because I can't even, it's probably been 20 years since I've had even a sip of it. So it's, and that's just a choice I made, there's no judgment with this, but it's just, I realized, the chemicals, the fake sugars, and you know what, for me, it was speaking to my intestinal health because it never made my gut feel good. So finally I said, okay, enough of this. This is the carbonation and all of this, the fake stuff basically was not happy. It was not making the way I felt happy. So that, again, that's just a choice that we make or we decide to make.
What are your drinks? I'm going to ask.
I'm a big water drinker. I drink, I wake up in the morning, I do lemon water. We have a local company here that does fermented olives and garlic. And they have, oh my gosh, it's kind of like an apple cider vinegar type of a thing, as far as what the drink is, but it's a fermented olive juice.
Oh, wow.
And
I haven't tried that.
Yes, so good. And it's all real good ingredients, and the way that they process it, or they don't process it, but the way that they ferment it and bring it to us. It's amazing. So I have a shot of that every morning. That's my natural probiotic. That's what I'm kind of using it for. But it's really lemon water throughout the day. I do love coffee, and I like tea. I usually have like a chamomile lavender tea at night sometimes. So I try to keep it just simple. And I do drink wine. So wine is definitely something that we enjoy, like on the weekends, and something that I can factor in.
The guideline for alcohol for women is 1 drink a day. And you can accrue it, and say I didn't have any drinks Monday through Thursday, so I want 4 or 5 glasses on Friday. But
that's funny. That's a way to justify it, huh?
Is like a 12-ounce beer, an ounce to an ounce and a half of liquor, or 4 to 5 ounces of wine.
Exactly. Yeah.
As far as blood sugar goes, I know that it can drop some people's blood sugars before it goes up. So it's kind of a cautionary thing to drink it on an empty stomach.
You are so right, for so many reasons. Yeah. And that's a point I always make, is to have something in my belly prior to having a glass of wine. So it's balance. The word balance is going to come up a lot.
Right.
And it definitely, but that's part of it as well. It's just being aware of what, where your blood sugar is, what's on board as far as maybe insulin, if you have insulin on board, and then timing the meals with a glass of wine. So it's very doable. And again, it's about quality. I'm a big believer in searching out good quality wines. And if you're going to enjoy with good, with the good spirit, right?
And I think, one of the things you're saying here that I recommend to all people, but I think for women with type 1, it's almost part of your routine is to be mindful. of your sugars, your balance, but also how you feel.
Yeah.
How your gut's feeling, how your brain's feeling, how your energy level is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all of
Our
that,
body talks to us.
it's
Yeah.
mindfulness without judgment, though. It's just observation and course correction.
Right. It sure is. That's a good point. It sure is. Yeah. Our body gives us symptoms, and it's just up to us to figure out what we're going to do with that information. Right. Yeah.
And I
Course
think
correct.
for women with type 1, you get the feelings so much more intensely than people without it, So you have to listen to your body talking to you, where I think a lot of women just tend to zone out on it.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And, that's another good point. We, managing blood sugar is it's a job that we obviously have to face every day, that we have to tend to. But, there's some underlying blessings to it. We are a part of the population that must stay more in tune with our body. So I think in the long run, we will feel better and have a better outcome, while we're here. So definitely use it to our advantage. Well, really nice. Is there anything else that we could maybe talk about just to kind of bring it in? I think we'll kind of close the conversation around the macronutrients. And we did dive into a little bit about different types of drinks and the fact that we can add a dessert in now and then, and different drink and alcohol options.
I think it was just about balancing your plate,
Yeah. We're just trying to get that visual, aren't we? Yeah. Just to get an understanding of what that's about. Well, we would love to hear from you. So definitely you will see here in the show notes, the website is type1inmidlife.com, and there will be a section on there that you can reach out and give us your show ideas, your topic ideas, because we definitely want to bring you things that you need to hear, maybe some things that you need more clarification on. Again, we mentioned there's a lot of information out there. It's even confusing for those of us living with a disease. What is the right thing? But number one, it's what is best for you. It's very unique. It's very individual. So that's the first step that we all should make.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so how can our listeners connect with you, Kitty? What's the best way to reach out?
I have a business partner, and we are on Instagram, and it's not geared towards type 1. It's geared towards general health, but the name of our site or our page on Instagram is On Track Lifestyles.
Okay.
We are in the process of redoing our recipes. And I think they're almost right. So you can also go to our website, ontracklifestyles.com. And then you can also, I guess you can put a link up for my email address if people want to.
Sure can. We sure can. Absolutely. Yes. It's really nice to have you here to help guide us. And I just really appreciate the opportunity to meet you here, and for you to learn more. Yeah, I appreciate you, Kitty. Yes. And there'll be some, I'm going to link all of this in the show notes, so you have a chance to get connected with Kitty. And I also have a how to build balanced meals with some recipes included as well. And just sort of some of the recipes I was mentioning. And it's a chance to stay connected with me as well. And all the recipes, I actually have a software that I build these recipes on, or the software builds them for me. It's amazing, but I can fine tune them with different classifications and tags, I guess is what they call them. But basically things like low glycemic, and to make sure that they're balanced and more diabetes friendly and blood sugar friendly. So, and they all include macronutrient counts. So the carbs, the fiber, the protein, so that we get a better idea of how to dose insulin accordingly. So check that out. So definitely take a look at our show notes this week, and you will get all these goodies from Kitty and myself. And well, thanks again, Kitty. Pleasure. And
we'll be chatting later.
We will, yes. Again, this is Kitty will be continuously with us, and I am so excited, very happy, and very blessed to have her in our community. And until next week, everybody have an amazing week, a blessed day, and filled with hope.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes. Thank you for listening to the Type 1 and Midlife podcast. Head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It's very much appreciated. Thank you. And be sure to check us out at abundanthealthwithmelissa.com for our free resources. See you next week.